Hello and welcome to another opportunity to learn how to heal emotionally. This is Pastor Frank Lewis, and I'm here today to talk to you about the key, parts of the key, understanding why you do what you do. I wrote this book. It's filled with revelations from God about how to get emotionally healed. You can get it on Amazon, and I also have a website, and the website is joystones.org. Please come to the website. You're going to have a wealth of information. Joy Stones, I was a pastor for 12 years, and Joy Stones Fellowship is the name of my church. I don't have the church anymore. COVID shut us down. The coronavirus shut us down because on March 20th of 2020, we were stopped from being able to hold church because we were renting an elementary school auditorium. And so we were done. And so that was a difficult time for me, but it was the plan of God. So it worked out really well that I was able to finish the book because I didn't have church to do all the time. And it worked out well. Well, you remember last time that let me say one more thing about I'm thinking of it, about the website. It has over 40 videos on it. It has a wealth of information, like I mentioned. But the most important thing it has on it is a Want Help button. And all you do is press that, and that'll get you to an opportunity to put your name and your email and what you want help about. And I'll be really glad to get back with you and talk to you about whatever you need help with. So I wanted to say that. Today we're going to talk about fear and shame. Last week, as you recall, I talked to you about how Satan uses pain. Well, Satan uses pain, as I said, to really alienate and cause children not to be able to trust their parents. If you can't trust your parents, you can't trust God. If you can't trust God, you can't fulfill your call. You can't be the person that God created you to be. You're not going to be able to have good relationships if you can't trust even people because of your problems that occurred. The reason why people can't trust is because they couldn't trust their parents, so they could only trust themselves. If you can't trust anybody but yourself, that's a pretty lonely place, and it's also a place that will cause you to have to do everything on your own, and it's very difficult to do that. As a matter of fact, it's impossible. Why? Because control is really an illusion. So in that whole situation, Satan doesn't want you having relationships with other people and relationships with God, because if you have a relationship with God, you're going to be able to fulfill your call. You're going to be blessed by God and trusted by God to fulfill your call. If you don't have relationships with other people, I told you last time, you're going to be in attachment pain. So today we're going to talk about how pain causes fear and shame. Because as we unpack and unwrap this understanding of what happened to us as children, we're going to be able to really understand what to do about it. Now, we recall a few weeks ago I talked about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the first step to being able to get free. But we have to unpack how Satan uses pain. We have to unpack how pain brings fear and shame. And the way we start that is by looking at what happened to Adam and Eve in the garden. And we know that they were in the garden, and Genesis 2 talks about, the last part of it talks about, they were naked, Adam and Eve were naked, and they weren't ashamed. They were naked and they weren't ashamed. Then in Genesis 3, they disobeyed God, Genesis 3:1, they disobeyed God, and what ended up happening? They ended up having fear and shame. How do we know this? Well, further down in Genesis 3, we discover that Adam was hiding. And he said to God, when God said, "Why are you hiding? Have you done something you shouldn't have done? Or did something that you disobeyed me?" And Adam said, I knew I was naked and I was ashamed, so I covered myself. One of the attributes of shame, the kind of shame we call toxic shame, is that a person will fear and hide. Now, fear, what is fear? Fear is an emotion that God gave us to protect us. Basically, fear is to protect us. But he said, you're not supposed to fear, you're supposed to have faith or trust, but fear is an emotion to protect us. And fear is false evidence appearing real, as the acronym, false evidence appearing real. Because is it real? Many times, most of the times, fear of something is not actually going to happen. We believe it is, so therefore we're afraid, but it's not going to happen. So it's not false evidence appearing real. It's not real, but it appears real. So fear is an emotion that keeps us from getting more pain. It also keeps us from having a relationship with God and a relationship with other people. Fear of what? Of pain, just like I talked last week. So when they were disobeyed, Adam and Eve disobeyed, they were afraid. Adam said to God, I was afraid because I was naked and I was ashamed. So disobeying God caused them to be in fear. Were they in fear before? No, they had a perfect relationship. They had a perfect relationship with their Father, their Creator. They had a perfect relationship with each other. Adam had a perfect relationship with his Creator God, his Father God. Eve had a perfect relationship with Father God, and Adam had a perfect relationship with each other. They were in paradise. Everything was good. They knew each other at a deep, they couldn't hurt each other. So there was nothing to hide. There was nothing that could happen. And so there was negative. But when they disobeyed, they got fear, they got shame. And when there's fear and there's shame, there's always the result that comes of what? I hid because I was naked. I hid because I was exposed. And so Adam hid, and then he did something else people in shame do. I did. I'm going to tell you about the toxic shame I lived in, because a lot of this is about that I wrote in here in the book. I wrote about fear and shame, and I have a whole chapter on it. And some of it is about me, because I had a serious case of toxic shame because of what I went through. So what did Adam do when God talked to him? He said, well, God said, did you disobey me? And Adam said, yeah, but it was the woman who caused me the problem. And what did the woman do? Eve, what did she do? She blamed the serpent. So what does shame cause? It causes fear. Pain comes first, because you say, well, where was the pain? Well, they just lost their relationship with God. In an instant, boom, they lost their relationship with God. The perfect relationship they had with God, they lost it. It was like God died. Well, if you've lost a loved one, or if you've lost in a relationship, you know some of what Adam and Eve felt. They felt tremendous pain in the loss of their relationship with God. But that wasn't it. That wasn't all. They also lost their relationship with each other. They lost their relationship with each other. And when they lost their relationship with each other, they had incredible pain. If you've lost a relationship, you know what that's like. It is incredible pain. So now they've got pain because they disobeyed God, because they now have no relationship with each other. They can hurt each other. They have no relationship with God. It's like he died. And so what ends up happening is they have tremendous pain. Well, pain causes fear of more pain, because who wants pain? We were wired for pain. I told you that last week. So nobody likes pain. Do you like pain? I don't like pain. And so we weren't designed by God to be able to like pain, to be able to, we have to endure pain. We have to endure suffering as a good soldier, the Bible says. So what happens? They were in pain. Now they have fear of more pain because, God could punish them. That's something he could have done. It doesn't say anything about it in the Bible, but think about it. They disobeyed. They could have been punished. Well, God didn't punish them. He did what? He made clothes for them so that they wouldn't be naked and ashamed. He's a good God. He's an awesome God. And you're going to find out how to trust God in the weeks ahead. So here's the situation. They're blaming. Adam blames his wife. Eve blames the serpent. Okay? That's what happens when people get in shame. Now, what is shame? Let's talk about it. You've got to know what shame is in order to be able to know how to get free from it. If you can't get free from it, you're going to live a life that's not going to be very much fun. You're going to live a life that's not going to have much joy. You're going to live a life that's not going to have much satisfaction. And you're not going to have much peace. Why? Because shame is a very powerful emotion, and shame steals the very life from us as human beings. So what happens is we have to look at shame. Now, shame is, if it is, causes us to have limits, like if I hurt somebody and my conscience pricks me and I have some shame about it, that's what we call benign shame. That's not going to produce the kind of results that toxic shame does. Benign shame is when I hurt somebody, I have, my conscience is pricking me or causing me to think about it, and now I'm shamed, and so I don't want to do that. I don't want to hurt people, so I don't want to do that. That's okay. That shame is not going to have, like I said, the results that toxic shame does. So what's toxic shame? Toxic shame is where I end up believing that I'm not valuable, not important, not worthy, defective, and I might even hate myself like I did myself. I hated myself because my father treated me like he hated me, so I hated me. And that may have happened to you. And I'm sorry if it did. I really am, because I know what it's like. And I'm sorry you went through that if you did. And so here is toxic shame. Toxic shame is the belief not that I did something bad, but that I am bad. That I am inherently defective. That I have that I'm flawed. I'm not good enough. Those beliefs come from toxic shame. Now you say, where does toxic shame come from? We know where it came from in the garden, but where does it come from in our lives? It comes from being criticized, being abused, being used, being sexually violated. It comes from parents that don't know how to raise children, so they do what was done to them to their children. And what happens is, if I was abused, and we all were in some form or fashion, then I'm going to have shame. Now, my parents will have had shame. Why? Because they didn't do anything about it, because they didn't know about it. So if we're raised by shame-based parents, parents who are shame and believe that they're defective and worthless and not valuable and not worthy of love, and they're defective, and they even hate themselves, what's going to happen? We're going to do the same thing, because parents are to put up a mirror to their children and reflect back to their children what the children are supposed to be. Well, how can I reflect back if my mirror is broken? If my mirror is broken, then how am I going to reflect back an accurate reflection? I can't. It's impossible. So I'm going to raise shame-based children. I'm going to cause my children to fear and have shame. And when that shame is that kind of shame, toxic shame, I'm going to believe that I'm defective, worthless, and all those things that I just stated. That may be your problem. That may be what you're dealing with. And if you are, I feel for you, because I've been through this. I had an incredibly difficult childhood, and I'm going to tell you more about it, but I was raised by a shame-based father and a shame-based mother, and I was steeped, I mean literally controlled by what toxic shame did to me. And what toxic shame, how it controls, is I believe things about myself that aren't true, so I do things that I would not do if I didn't believe that I was defective and worthless and hated myself. You know, I raced motorcycles because I had a death wish, if you will. I drank too much. I did all these things to kill the pain of toxic shame. And toxic shame is so dangerous, because what it really does is it causes us to look inward. It causes us to look inward. And when we look inward, what do we see? Well, we see not valuable, not important, not worthy, defective, not good enough, and what do we do then with that? Well, we don't know what to do with it, so we bury it. And we become other people. Not the people God created us to be. No, we can't be that, because we are buried in shame internally. Me, I drove a Mercedes, looked good, wore suits, carried a briefcase. I looked good. You may be doing the same thing I was doing. I needed to make a lot of money so I could have value, so I could look good. But I wasn't believing that I had value. I just looked like I had value. And I could fake it pretty good, so I could fake it so you didn't know that I hated myself. You didn't know that I really was afraid of you knowing who I was, because I didn't like me. I hated me, and I thought you would leave me, and nobody wants to be left. Nobody wants to be alone, because God created us for relationships. So here I am. I'm stuck in toxic shame. I'm ending up in a situation where I'm a false self. Most of the people in our world are false selves. You're not getting what you see is not what you're getting. And you can see that by the lack of integrity, honesty, openness, transparency, and vulnerability that most people can't handle. Most people don't live. Most people, either on the defensive, because they've learned that they're on the offensive, so they learned that a good offense is a good defense. Most people will fight you in order to not be known when they have this horrible cancer of toxic shame. Actually, what's really interesting is that when I believe that I'm worthless and not valuable and defective and hated myself, anybody that would get too close, I'd get angry at them. Why? Because I could push them away. They would never know that who I really was. I got angry. I pushed people away. I did irrational things. You may be doing the same thing because you fear being known at a deep personal level. And so many people do. But what does the Bible say? James 5:16 says, confess your faults one to another and pray that you might be healed. Well, you can't confess your faults if you don't believe that you're valuable enough to be listened to. You're not valuable enough to be heard. You're defective. You're worthless. And you hate yourself. That's not a great way to live. It's a horrible way to live. And I live that way. My father was so abusive to me. Physically, beat me with a belt, punished me for doing things that were just mistakes. I get severely punished. And then he would, every dinner we had, my father came home, he had a couple of drinks, he was a doctor, he came home, and what ends up happening is he picked a fight with my sister, myself, or my mother, mostly my sister and me. And he would send us to our rooms, come down and yell and scream at us. Well, that's why I hated myself. And it was very, very difficult. I was so insecure, it was ridiculous. I made a lot of money, but didn't bring happiness. It didn't bring joy. It didn't bring peace. It sure as heck didn't give me satisfaction. So what did I end up with? I ended up with the same problem I had when I started, making the money, when I did this. I lived in a big house, drove a Mercedes, the kids were in private school, and it didn't change a thing. It didn't change a thing for me. But I'll tell you what did start to change is when I realized the antidote to shame is very much talking about it. See, confess your faults one to another and pray that you might be healed. I discovered that if I brought it into the light, if I brought this toxic shame that I was living with into the light, that it would do what? It would dissipate. It would begin to become less and less powerful in my life. And so I began to talk about it everywhere I went. Now, I know that this may be difficult for you. You may not have anybody to talk to. It's one of the reasons I have in the book about reparenting groups. You've got to find somebody to talk to about your toxic shame that's not going to make it worse. You got to do that. Because if you can't talk about it, you can't. Now, you can talk about it with God, but if you can't trust God, how are you going to talk about it with God? So it's a problem. I mean, it's a very serious problem. So you must find somebody you can talk to about it. I actually have groups of people that come and talk about their shame. They don't always label it as shame, but it is basically shame, fear, and they're talking about their pain. So the more you talk about it, the better off you are. And what happens is that the more I talked about it in the groups that I was at the church that I was at, because they have recovery at the church. So you may have at your church, you may have a Celebrate Recovery. That's a place that you can talk about it. You may have other groups. Well, if you can find some people that will listen to you and allow you to talk about it and not judge you and not, put you down, condemn you, then you can get free of toxic shame. And that's what happened to me. I'll tell you a story. You won't believe this. I realized I had to talk about my shame, and what I mean by that is how I felt about myself, not only in the group, but I decided to talk about it in wherever I went. So I go to Ralph's and I'm checking out, and the checker, like she's done 100 maybe 1,000 times, says, "How are you doing today?" And I said to her, "Well, I'm not doing very well because I'm not a very good father. I don't do very well with finances. I'm not doing very well with my work. I'm not doing well in my marriage." Well, you can imagine what she was probably thinking to herself, "I'm not asking anybody else in this line about how they're doing today." Why? Because I spoke to her, and I didn't care at that time. I didn't care who knew, because I knew I had to get free. You're going to need to do that. And when you do that, you're going to find a different life. You're going to find that life is easier, life is better, life is wonderful. Why? Because you've thrown off the shackles, you've thrown off the blanket of toxic shame. And toxic shame is one thing that will keep you down the way Satan wants to keep you down, and you'll just keep going around the mountain. You'll feel stuck, and that's not what God wants for you. That's not what I want for you. That's not why I wrote this book that you can get on Amazon. That's not why I do this program. I want you to be free. So just like forgiveness takes care of rejection and will solve that problem, talking about toxic shame will solve the toxic shame problem. And you will have peace, more peace, maybe not all peace, because we still have to go into what we believe and the false beliefs, but you're going to have a better life. You're going to have a better result. You are going to have the abundant life that Jesus promised in John 10:10, and you will have it because you have forgiven and you have talked about toxic shame. And when you do that, it's going to free you, and you're going to have a much better result in your life with all your relationships, and you're going to be freer from pain. You won't have as much pain. Daily pain comes from toxic shame. So you just do what I tell you to do here and see if it works. And when it does, you come to the website, joystones.org, and tell me how it worked for you. And I'll believe that you're going to be free, and that's a promise. Jesus